I was in now. He was COVID. He had COVID yesterday.
Oh, he finally.
Positive?
That's the positive. That makes sense why he's not here.
He was unpositive for so long, and then he was positive.
All right, foolish
I
lamb
didn't
for everyone.
believe after these tests. The blood business is a good business to be in.
Listen,
The testing business, people.
Somebody's making money.
you know who made the most money in the gold rush in the middle of the 19th century? It was not the people going to get gold. It was a Jew, Levi Strauss, who decided that, you know what they need over there? They need picks, they need shovels, and they need jeans. They need clothes to wear while they're so.
Interesting.
That's how a kid named Levi Strauss decided to.
Nathan Strauss.
Yeah.
Nathan was his brother, right?
Yeah. That's what happens. You make money when you're in the in-between game.
Yeah. You know, the city of Netanya in Israel is named for Nathan Strauss.
Yeah, amongst many, Rehov Strauss is. Okay. So we're holding Gufa. So yesterday's daf had finished with a discussion of trying to answer how is it possible to have a case in the Mishnah where you could be Yotze, the mitzvah of Megillah, while the Sofer is writing. And the only way it explained it, where it would fit, would be in a case where the Sofer is writing the Megillah and he has another Megillah in front of him. So he's copying from one. So there's a full Megillah in front. And therefore he's writing the Megillah and he's copying it that way. So the Gemara wanted to prove from the fact that we had to make the Mishnah in that scenario that it must be that when it comes to the halachos of writing Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzah, and all of the halachos of a sofer, that the halacha is that he has to always do it copying and he can't just do it bal peh. And there's a logical reason why you would think that would be the case, because if it's person's just doing it bal peh, our entire Masorah is predicated on making sure that every single word of Torah is not changed. So we don't want the Sofrim who are writing the Sifrei Torah and the Mezuzahs and these types of things to be making any mistakes. So one would think from our Mishnah, you could bring a raya that it's not only suggested that you do that, but it's required. The Gemara says there's no raya. It could very well be just that's how it occurred. He happened to have a Megillah next to him, and maybe the halach is you don't need it. The Gemara, once mentioning that sugya, is now going to discuss that from here to the end of the end of Yuches, and then we'll pick up with a new Mishnah.
You think by 8:30 we'll finish stuff today?
I could try. I want to say
It's an hour.
yeah. I'm hoping less, but yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Says the Gemara. Gufa. It's also, this is the halacha. The halacha that we were trying to prove a raya to. He says the halacha is like that you can't write tefillin, mezuzah, sefer Torah unless you have another sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzah in front of you, so that you're always copying, one thing from the other, so you can't make a mistake. Meisvei asked the Gemara Brisa that's going to be a question on this. Amr of Shimon ben Elazar, Ma'aseh Reb Meir. There was a Ma'aseh with Reb Meir. Shahalach la'aver la'aber shana ba'asi. He went to be ma'aber the year, right, by adding a second other into the year, meaning, and he was there during other when there was the Mikra Megillah. Megillah in the city of Asi apparently was probably one of these Kefarim that we discussed. They didn't even have a Megillah. That's how small the village was. Ukasva miliba, and therefore he wrote it up himself. Imagine that, just to be a sofer, walk into a city and say, "Oh, you don't have a Megillah? I'll write one up." And he sits down, writes a Megillah. Now that meant that he knew the entire Megillah bal peh from front to back, which and not only that, ukara. So not only did he write it, they read it. Meaning, you see, they were yotze the mitzvah. So what's the question? The question over here is if they didn't have a Megillah, and we just said 2 seconds ago that in order to be able to write Sifrei Kodesh, you need to have an original that you're copying from. How was Meir allowed to do this and read from this Megillah? It should be a problem. The Reb Meir is unique because by him there's a pasuk which the pashtus just means your eyelids will straighten against you. But the idea in the pasuk is that there are those people who have a relationship to Torah that it's always standing in front of their eyes. This is they say that the Vilna Gaon used to be able to tell you not only Torah, he used to know Kol Torah Kula front to back, but he used to know it backwards to forwards also. The same way you would know that the Aleph comes before a Beis, he knew that he used to be able to read things in his mind. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly not saying it about me and you. Means the Torah is in front of him at all times. Amrle Rami Bar Chama Reb Yirmiyah Midifti, meaning what I just said is what the Gemara is about to say. What's pshat in this pasuk? Amrle Elu Divrei Torah. What it's referring to is Torah. And how do I know that it's referring to the Torah? Because the pasuk of afapecha, that the ayin pei, which is the shorish of the word, you find in another pasuk hasaif einecha boi, a person who blinks his eyes on Torah. That moment, it's gone. Meaning it's easy. Torah just goes in, it goes right out. It doesn't naturally want to sit in our minds because it's a spiritual. It's the manifestation of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in this world. It's the only real manifestation of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in this world that we take in. It doesn't really belong in us. It's something it's not a physical thing. It really wants to leave. I don't remember where I heard this. That Torah is nimshal to a bird that a person's watching, and that Hashem gives a special gift to someone. I give you this bird, you hold it. Why is it nimshal to a bird? Because the bird, the moment you let go, flies away. Torah is like that also. Yeah, a person has to constantly be reviewing it and reviewing it and reviewing it, because if you don't review it, it just naturally goes away. No matter how much work you put into it.
You don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, 100%. So either way, so you see that Rav Meir's, we're saying the reason why Rav Meir is unique is because really what's the purpose of this halacha? You need to have a copy of the Megillah or a copy of Tefillin in front of you so not to make a mistake. But really, if a person is such a bucky in Kol Torah Kula, and especially in Tanakh, where he could tell you every word, every tag, every whatever, so for him, it's not a big deal. He can go ahead and sit and write it. So it seems that he's a unique dispensation to this halacha. Ve'afilu hachi, miyusharin hein etzel Rav Meir, that even though there's a pasuk of hasoif, that if a person blinks, the Torah goes away, but by Rav Meir it wasn't so. That's the Gemara's answer. Gemara's bothered. Rav Chizda ishkechel Rav Chananel to have the kasas farm shleim and aksav. He found Rav Chananel, who was an Amoyer many years later, but still a big Talmud Chacham. He found that he was doing the exact same thing that Rav Meir did, that he was writing tefillin, mezuzos, v'chulu, shleim and aksav, meaning Baal Peh. Amerlei. He says you are such a chashuv Talmud Chacham that the entire Torah could be written on based on what you say, meaning that you're like Rav Meir in that sense. However, still, the rabbi said also you don't get a special heter just because you're a very big Talmud Chacham. There's a halach; it's got to be done min aksav. It's got to be done min aksav. So the Gemara says, meaning that they has the same din of Rav Meir, and asked the Gemara about Rav Meir kasav. So how was it that although we said to this Amayra you couldn't do it, but we said to Rav Meir you could? It can't just simply be that Rav Meir knew it more than him. We're not talking about the depth of Torah. We're talking about, do you know every word that's written in Tanakh? If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. So if the halacha was for Rav Chizda not, for Rav Chananel not, so then Rav Meir also. So the Gemara says Shasat Chak Shani. Shasat Chak is different. Meaning Rav Meir was in a city where they didn't have a Megillah at all. Whereas over here, we were talking about you want to just write another Megillah. That's a different story. So halacha l'maisa. The halacha is we paskin that really one is supposed to we'll read a little further. Abai Shara l'debei bar chavai lemichtav tefillin mezuzah shleim and aksav. So now we're going to separate the different halachas. So tefillin and mezuzahs, right? He says he allowed them to. Sorry, just did something on the video here. Lemichtav tefillin mezuzah shleim and aksav. That tefillin and mezuzahs don't require a copy. He just got on.
Come in, we miss you.
Before Shalema.
How do you feel?
Thank you. I don't know if you can see me or hear me. I don't know.
I can hear you. I can't see you.
How do you feel?
Are you logged in under a different Zoom?
Yeah, I'm using my other phone. Yeah, I feel. I felt worse when I didn't have COVID.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, whatever.
Hashem should bless you with refuah quickly.
Amen.
We miss you. We miss you.
Come on, we miss you.
Missed you guys too. Yeah.
Okay. So the Gemara, we're holding in the Gemara, we're discussing whether a person, a sofer, is allowed to write tefillin, mezuzahs, sefer Torah, Megillah from Baal Peh, from his own remembering the words, or does he need a copy in front of him before he's doing it? So now we're bringing Abaye says, Abaye Sharla Debei Bar Chavul Lemichtav Tefillin and Mezuzah Shleim and Aksav. He says that tefillin and mezuzah you're allowed to. Kiman, who is this opinion like? Ki Haitana, Detanya, like Rabbi Yirmiyah, Omer Mishum Rabbeinu, that tefillin and mezuzah Nichtavais Shleim and Aksav. And once we're mentioning that brisa, what does the brisa then says? It says Ve'ein Srichin Sirtut, that tefillin and mezuzah do not require sirtut. Sirtut is the scoring lines on the cloth. It's basically like a college lined ruled paper type thing where it allows you to keep the words straight. So it's not required. The Hilchasa, what's the halacha?
Tefillin and mezuzahs don't require that? They don't
Well,
require
that's what we'll
Come up.
halacha l'maisa we paskin. It's ideal to do it for everything. Sefer Torah, it's tefillin mezuzah. So it says like this: Ein tzrichin sirtut. The Hilchasa tefillin ein tzrichin sirtut. Mezuzah tzrichin sirtut. So we paskin that tefillin it does not require it, whereas mezuzah it does. And by the way, Sefer Torah it does also. And edi v'edi and both tefillin and mezuzah nichtavais shalai min aksav. Why is the reason? My time migras greasin, because okay. So let's just work this out quickly. we'll sort of leave the Sirtut discussion for another time when we get to Menachos and Git, and it'll come up a lot more detail. But at least as it pertains to the halacha of whether you're allowed to write any of these svarim from Baal Peh or not. So it says that Rav Meir did it. This other Rav Chananel didn't. And the Gemara says Rav Meir is different because it's Shasat Chak. And then the halacha, the way it comes out is that you don't need to have a copy for tefillin and mezuzahs. Why? Because those psukim people are comfortable with, and therefore we're not concerned. Meaning, basically, everyone has a din of Rav Meir. I don't know about you, but I couldn't tell you every single word in Haya Kivyecha. But okay, fine. But by Megilla, what we're going to be saying is that l'chura the halacha would be that you would have a chiyuv to have a copy, because no one can honestly say that the Megillah is something that you can say every word Baal Peh the same way you would by Shema, let's say, and certainly a Sefer Torah. So some Sefer asks, Ma'asim b'chol yom, that Sofrim do not sit with an open Sefer Torah in front of them while they're writing a new Sefer Torah. So how is that mutter? So he says a very interesting svara. He said, I mean, what do they do now? They'll open up a tikkun. You know what a tikkun is, like, and they'll write a Sefer Torah from the tikkun. So he says that that's not because, he says basically, the tikkun makes that sofer like Rav Meir. By having the tikkun there, it means you know all the words. So you're like Rav Meir who could do it. But you need Shasat Chak. He says having a second Sefer Torah available for just a kosher Sefer Torah available just for writing, that's a Shasat Chak by definition. That's Shasat Chak in the Gemara means like it's exigent circumstances. Exactly right. It's a scenario that's not a normal scenario where we're going to be more lenient. So he says, therefore, with the Sefer Torah, it always has that. So it'll come out that of all of these things, the one that has the biggest chumrah is Megillah, because Megillah, you don't have the heter of the Chassam Sofer that you use a tikkun, because really, you don't have the Shasat Chak heter of that, because it is easy. I could write a Megillah 3 weeks before Purim. I don't need I could take up my kosher Megillah out and I could do it. So it just comes out ironically a little bit more of a chumrah. Either way, continues the Gemara. Haisa ksuva b'sam. It said in the Mishnah that if it's written in these 4 types of ink, it doesn't work, or if it's written on these 2 types of paper, it doesn't work. We'll say that it only can be done b'diyoi, which is a special halachic ink, a special black permanent ink, and it has to be on cloth that is tanned properly. So Zakti Gemara. Sam, what is that sama? When you write with it, it comes out in a yellowish, goldish color. Sikra amarabba barchana sikarta shma. It comes out red. Koimos is kuma, it's like a sap, also it's not black. Kankantum is charta du shafchi, which is like shoe polish, I think. I don't know why or what color that shoe polish was. I assume it was black, but for some reason it doesn't have the ingredients that are required for the right type of diyoi. It said in the Mishnah, diftera, which is the type of cloth. What is diftera? Is the miliach ukmiach upits. There was 3 stages to make the cloth, to tan it properly. The first thing you would do is you would salt it, then you would sort of dip it in like flour and mix it and soak it in water, and then you would add this gallnuts type of, I don't know what they are, but they're like something that grows on top of certain types of vegetables and fruits, that you would then use that, mix it in, and it would provide like a certain coloration. They do that, meaning you need to
ink. That ink was just regular ink, isn't it? I mean, it's colored.
It says, but not treated with gallnuts.
But that's here. If it's not treated with gallnuts, it's puzzle.
But the ink they use today is regular ink, except for
what we're talking now about the cloth. You mean the first couple?
The first couple.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I have a thing in my
of Saffron ink.
Looks like ink to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can use like Bic ink or something.
No, I think it has to be
natural
or designated.
That's it. I don't know.
Okay, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That's a sham.
Conversation.
Yeah, exactly right. And so that it says in the pasuk. It says in the Mishnah. Last one. Yar is machka. It's like a paper of reeds. But the basic point is it needs to be made of an animal skin. It has to be tanned properly. And Ajtei Ksuva Ashuris. So here there's a big hak in the Mishnah. We said earlier that you can have Megillas written in
Greek.
Not only Greek, it can be written in English.
For people who
if you only speak that language. So what does it mean? It says in the Mishnah Ksuva Ashuris. So for the Gemara it says Dechsiv Kiksavam Kizmanam, that the pasuk, since it's a Ksavam Kizmanom, teaches us that it has to be Dafka Ashuris. But if I remember correctly, on the Mishnah, Ashuris is either taken out by the Taisus entirely, or there's a sheet in the Rishonim, I forget what sheet, who holds that Ksav Ashuris means even if it says that you can read it in English or Spanish or Portuguese, the words need to be written like the way we write Yiddish. Yiddish is written with Lashon HaKodesh, even though it's not Lashon HaKodesh when you speak it. There's a language and then there's a font. The font has to be Ksav Ashuris. That's one sheet that we don't pass like that. And
it has to be transliterated.
Right. Right. Transliterated, meaning written in what we'll call Hebrew language, right? Akshuras, but spoken, it could be like you can write the word, like the classic example that I keep on using, I don't know why, is Cholov companies that Rav Moshe uses whenever, and it's true, is companies, right? You can write the word, an English word in Hebrew letters, like you can write the word, coffee, right? Kuf, pei, yud, coffee, right? Like, but the word is coffee, it's not cafe, whatever. So that's one shita in what Ksav Ashuris means. And then there's another opinion who says that no, then when the Mishnah says Ksav Ashuris, it just means when you're going to be laning in Hebrew, then of course it needs to be written in Ksav Ashuris, and really is no chiddush. But either way, they all somehow make it lavdafka to fit the Gemara earlier. Continues the Mishnah said I'll say for b'diyai, the meaning that when is the Megillah going to be kosher? Only when it's written on cloth and it's written with ink. Minalan, where do we know this halacha? It's asya ksiva. We learned it out from the pasuk in Yirmiyah. Ksiv hacha b'tikas of Esther Amalka, that Esther Amalka wrote the Megillah. Uksiv hasam, and it says in Yirmiyah, Anavi vayomer lehem baruch mipiv yikra ve'elai. Sorry, mipiv yikra elai es kol advarim ha'ela ve'ani kaisev ala sefer b'diyai. So the pasuk. So they ask over here a little bit of a kasha. I mean, what do you need this Gzera Shava for? Meaning, if I have a pasuk. Is that you, Rabbi? Sounds nice. I like it.
Wake up, Bella.
Oh, I have it on. Never have it on.
That's funny.
Okay.
I like that
Wake
song.
up, we should play that for the minions.
Yeah.
So,
everybody's phone.
Don't worry.
So what's the Gzera Shava? The Gzera Shava is that just like I see over there, that all Chav Dalet Sefer Tanakh have to be written ala Sefer B'diyai, and it says Ksiva there, so therefore I make a Gzera Shava from there to here by Megillah. So asks the Rashba. The Rashba asks, what do I need a Gzera Shava for? If I have a pasuk in Yirmiyah, which is teaching me, by the way, the halacha over there is that Megillah's Eicha also needs to be ala Klaf B'diyai. So why isn't Esther just included in that as well? It's one of the Chav Dalet Sefer Tanakh. We don't need a whole Gzera Shava. So the Rashba says, a very, very pashut teretz, we'll see in today's Gemara, that the Megillah is unique because the Megillah is referred to in the Megillah itself as a sefer, but it's also referred to as an igeris. Since it's called an igeris is like a manuscript, so that almost would have, meaning it's like this transitional type of Torah Shebechsav, that on the one hand, like you see, Esther was requesting from the Talmidei Chachamim of her time, we want this to be considered part of the 24
I
books.
thought you were going to ask, how can you be Mepiv? If it says you have to write it from a sefer. I'm not sure. Was it Baruch Manaria?
Yeah, Baruch Manaria, yeah.
And what, I thought you have to have, even if it's God, whoever it is, you have a sefer.
There's no other
No,
Megillah.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Isn't he saying, I wrote it from his mouth? He dictated me, I wrote it down?
Vayomer lehem baruch mipiv yikra elai es kol advarim
Didn't he say you
ha'ela.
have to write it with sefer, which was
Oh, you're asking a kasha from this Gemara from before. In a Chanami. Meaning maybe that's the answer? No, because Lamais he's talking about all Chav Dalet Sefer Tanakh there. I think that's a good kasha. I don't know. You're right. For the pasuk, it's mashma that
Megillah
he
says
did it.
it's the only
Maybe
Megillah.
Hashem's different. I don't know. Yeah. What's that, Gene?
It's the only Megillah that's read from a cloth, right?
According to the Vilna Gaon, he holds that all 5 Megillas need to be done that way. Shiur Shiurim on Pesach.
Really?
Kahelis. No, Haftarahs, really. Yeah.
Really?
We don't paskin like that. I mean, we don't.
People do.
Yeah, there are minhag hagra, sure. It just means your wife has more opportunities to buy you gifts. That's all it means. Now she can't just get you a Megillah Esther. Now you got to get a Kahelis and a Shiur Shiurim.
What, Kahelis? So it's all available on a cloth, or it has to be written? It's not readily available.
You pay the sofer, he'll write it.
All right.
No.
What do you have terrorists do? What do they have? A book? What do they have?
Yeah, they have. There are schools that have.
What do they have?
What, tikkun? Like,
No, they have actual klaf of all the haftarahs.
Oh, that terrorists or the whole Tanakh? They have to find
No,
it.
I think they have just the specific parshas of the haftarahs. Yeah,
Interesting.
it could be not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mr. Hashem, we should get to the point where we can afford to buy for the shul.
Let's get Minyan first.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's the Rashba, that's the Rashba's teretz. But there's the famous Brisker Rav is this Gemara. There's a Brisker Rav that talks about that even though you'd have a Gzera Shava, if all I would have is the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, he says, like, in a classic Brisker sense, there's really 2 dinim in Ksiva for Megillah. There's the din of what I would need to do in order to make it one of Sifrei Kodesh. And for that, Megillah is no different than all of the other stuff, Chav Dalet Sefer Tanakh. But there's a separate. Can you go open the door for him? I don't know who that is, man. But there's a separate halacha that in order for me to be yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, the Megillah needs to be written a certain way. I don't know. It looks like he's delivering something.
Yes.
Yep. Hold on a second. I'm getting a delivery.
Okay. Okay. Oh, you really? Yeah.
Anybody, for anything perishable here?
Although, I'm thinking just the opposite. I think we should blow this up. We should have like a minion a week. Call January 2nd, January 8th, minion a week and have food and blow it up the other way. That quality.
Yeah, okay. That might work.
Announce that January, New Year, new minion, breakfast will be served. He was thinking about keeping it quiet.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a good idea.
I would start promoting it on Sunday.
Yeah.
Minion a week.
I think what we could do is you can maybe make it where every day it's like a lighter breakfast, but then Sunday morning, maybe make it slightly bigger.
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning is Yismach.
No time to promote it then. And you have to understand another thing. We got to talk. This is all going to take time from the dock.
Well,
a tablecloth, cleaning it up.
Yeah.
We're going to take time from the dock.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about it. Let's finish today's doc and then we'll have a conversation. So, all right. So no. There's a Brisker Rav. Brisker Rav says there's two different dinim. There's the din of the ksiva for Megilla itself, to be Yotzi the Megillah, and then there's the din, the normal din.
Where is this? The Brisker Rav? Menachos? He wrote on Menachos?
I think he wrote it on. No, he wrote on Kachim, but he wrote on the Rambam. But the Rambam is from the beginning. He wrote it on the Rambam.
The Grizz?
Yeah.
Where is it? On where?
This Brisker Rav, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's. I think it would be in. It's on the Rambam.
The Brisker Rav was also, wasn't it?
Siva Sefer Torah.
Right.
He was a Chaim Soloveitchik's son.
Chaim Soloveitchik's son.
What was
Chaim
it?
Soloveitchik was founder of the method of learning, Brisker Rav.
Brisker Rav was his son.
Chaim Soloveitchik.
Was the founder.
So just to understand, there's sort of the Brisker Rav had a brother, right? Rav Chaim had more than one son, right? Meaning Rav Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University. So his father, right? Joseph B. Yosef Yasher. So his father was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who was a brother of the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav was his uncle, right? And his grandfather was Rav Chaim.
Does that make sense? Brisker Rav was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik.
Well, we don't call him in the yeshiva world. We don't call him the Brisker Rav. We call him Rav Chaim. And his son Rav Velvel is the Brisker Rav.
Rav
Velvel. That's
my name.
There you go.
He had a bunch of sons.
Yeah, that's right. And you have Rav David, and then his nephew, Rabbi Yeshua. A lot of different.
And they were from where?
Well, they're living in Eretz Yisrael.
Really? They're Russian, I think.
And wherever Brisk was, I don't know. I think it was in Lithuania, maybe. I don't know. Either way, new Mishnah. Very, very interesting Mishnah and Gemara here. So I'm going to read it inside, and I'll explain when we get to the Gemara. Bein ir shahalach lekrach, bein krach lahalach leir. Remember, we said in the Mishnah at the beginning of Masechta that if you live in a walled city, you read on the 15th, and you live in an unwalled city, you read on the 14th. So I'll use Yerushalayim, which is a walled city, and Bnei Brak, which is an unwalled city, just to make it a little bit more palatable when we're talking about it. Yeah. So Ben Ir, a person who lives in Bnei Brak, shahalach lekrach to Yerushalayim. Uben krach shahalach leir, a person who is from Yerushalayim who went to Bnei Brak. Right? So we'll see in the Gemara exactly what the case is.
The Krach is Bnei Brak?
Krach is Yerushalayim. Krach is referred to as a walled city.
What?
And Ben Ir is the unwalled city.
Oh, the opposite. Ir is the unwalled city.
Unwalled, and Krach is the walled city. Wow. At least that's what it means in our Mishnah and the first Mishnah.
No.
Mukaf Choyma is the Krach. Krach is a person who has a wall. So Yerushalayim, so you have two people. You have a person who lives in Yerushalayim, you have a person who lives in Bnei Brak. So what happens if the person in Yerushalayim went to Bnei Brak, and vice versa, the person from Bnei Brak went to Yerushalayim? Now, one has to read on the 14th because he lives in Bnei Brak, and one has to read on the 15th because he lives in Yerushalayim. But what happens if they find themselves in the other city on the day that the other one's supposed to read? So I'm specifically being vague a little bit in the Mishnah because the Gemara is going to flesh it out. And it can get not complicated, but you just gotta. I don't want to confuse. So it says over here, if the person who is traveling, his intent is to go back to his city, then the halacha is he follows his place, the city that he's from. Whereas Ve'im Lav, if his intent is to stick around in that place, let's say the Ben Yerushalayim is in Bnei Brak and he plans on staying there through the rest of the Purim, then he takes on a din Korei Imahen of that city. Right, so that's the statement of the Mishnah. We'll get to the specifics in a moment. The Mishnah continues. So this came up a little bit yesterday. The halacha is that really one's supposed to read the entire Megillah. But what's the minimum amount of the Megillah that one reads? That if you read less than that, you're not Yotze, that you need to minimally read this. So we'll see three opinions here and then a fourth opinion in the Gemara. So Gemara says, Rav Meir Aimer Kulo. Rav Meir says, what do you mean? You got to read the whole thing. Rav Yehuda Aimer Mi Ish Yehudi, you have to start from the point where we introduce Mordechai to the story. Rabbi Yossi Omer Mei Achar Hadvarim Ha'ela, which is the point where Haman is introduced to the story. So basically, three opinions in the Mishnah. You either got to start from the beginning, you start from where Mordechai is introduced, or you start from where Haman is introduced. And we'll see in the Gemara a fourth opinion, which is the opinion that says you start from when Achashverosh was awoken in the middle of the night, remembering that Mordechai saved his life. So we'll see exactly what the four opinions are and why they hold what they hold. But either way, let's get back to the first din of the Mishnah, which again was when you are a Ben Yerushalayim who's going to Bnei Brak, or if you live in Bnei Brak and you go to Yerushalayim, how do you lane? Amar Rava Lo Shanu, the din of our Mishnah, Lo Shanu El, our Mishnah is only being taught in the following scenario. She'asid lachzar beleile yedalid, aval ein asid lachzar beleile arba'asar kaira imahim. Now I'm going to say it out loud outside the Gemara because it's a little complicated, so I just want to say it like this. So the rule is as follows. The Iker Kriya of Megillah is by day. This came up earlier in the Masechta, right? So even though we all make a bigger fanfare about the night reading, really halacha lamaisa, we treat the daytime reading, halacha lamaisa is more of the Iker reading. In fact, we make another shechianu in the morning, which is a very strange halacha, right? Normally, you don't find yourself making a second shechianu on the same day, right? But we do. We do in the morning. We make a shechianu when we lay in Megillah because really the Iker Kriya is by day, and they say that the shechianu by night should be going on all the mitzvahs of the day. But the point is the Kriya of the morning is the Iker one. So therefore, what Rashi explains the Gemara to mean is as follows. If your intent, the night of the 14th, as Megillah time comes in for most people, if your intent is to be in the following morning in the city that reads on the 14th, then you have a din of a Ben 14th. Right? So that means, let's say I'm from Yerushalayim, and I'm going to be in Bnei Brak the night of the 14th. Should I go to shul and hear Megillah, or can I ignore it? Can I just go to the Marav and leave? So it depends. If my intent is to wake up in the morning and wake up in Bnei Brak, then I'm a Ben Bnei Brak for that day, and therefore I read the Megillah that night and that day. Now, if I'm planning on leaving before, meaning if I'm planning on after dinner tonight going home, or sometime before sunburn, daylight, then the halacha is that since I'm from Yerushalayim, then I've never lost my status as being from Yerushalayim, and when I end up at home tomorrow night, the night of the 15th, I'll read the night of the 15th because that's where I live. And the halacha is true in the opposite direction also. If I'm from Bnei Brak and I'm supposed to read on the night of the 14th, and this is the way Rashi explains it, and I find myself in Yerushalayim on the night of the 14th, so meaning in Yerushalayim, there's no one's reading tonight, and tomorrow morning, no one's reading. Tomorrow night, someone's going to read in Yerushalayim. It's their night. What if my intent is to be in Yerushalayim for tonight and tomorrow night? And the question now is, will I be in Yerushalayim the morning of the 15th? Meaning, will I be in Yerushalayim on the day when everyone who lives in Yerushalayim is having their primary time of reading? If my intent is to be there at that point in time, then even now on the 14th in Yerushalayim, I'm considered already a Ben Yerushalayim, and I don't have to read tonight in my apartment. I can go to shul tonight, daven Marav with everyone else. I don't have to hear Megillah, even though I'm from Bnei Brak and it's the night of the 14th. I can ignore that. I can wake up tomorrow morning, go to shul, daven a regular shachar. Don't have to worry about Megillah. The night of the 15th, I'll now read with everyone in Yerushalayim. But that's only if my intent is to stay for Shachris of the 15th, because then I'm considered a temporary citizen of Yerushalayim and have the din of Yerushalayim. If on the other hand, my intent is to leave before Shachris of the 15th, then I have a status of a Ben 14. So what would be the halacha? I'm in Yerushalayim on the night of the 14th. There's no minyan there of laying in the Megillah. I, living from Bnei Brak, have a din of a Ben Bnei Brak still, because I'm no longer a temporary Ben Yerushalayim. I would have to read Megillah on my own Friday, the night of the 14th and the day of the 14th. That's what Rav is saying according to Rashi. And that's what all the Rishonim agree with. But what comes up from here is you have already, now you can start to imagine all of the different scenarios. What happens if, we'll go back to the simple case. I'm from Yerushalayim. I'm in Bnei Brak for Purim, for the first day of Purim. I intend on sticking around for Shacharis tomorrow morning. So we said that I should go to Megillah tonight. What happens if I change my mind? So I go to tonight to hear Megillah, and I leave. I end up practically leaving before. So I get on a bus 3 o'clock in the morning. I head back to Yerushalayim. I show up in Yerushalayim. It's still dark out. I wake up in Yerushalayim in the daytime. So now the Megillah I learned the night before, it turned out I didn't need to do that because really I was never really a citizen of that city. I would now need to read at night. What happens if it's the opposite direction? I'm a Ben Yerushalayim, right? So that means, I'm a Ben Bnei Brak. I'm from Bnei Brak, and I'm in Yerushalayim for the first day. So that night, the halacha is, if my intent is to be in Yerushalayim on the 15th by morning, then I don't have to read tonight. So I don't read tonight because I'm intending to be there, and I don't read tomorrow. Why? Because I'm only supposed to read on the 15th. The night of the 15th, I read because I'm in Yerushalayim. But then, in the middle of the night, I decide, you know what? I want to go home. Or my wife calls me, I need you to come back home. So I don't end up waking up in the morning in Yerushalayim. I end up waking up in the morning in Bnei Brak. So now I'm in the 14th.
Nobody did it then.
So what am I supposed to do? Meaning, do we say, right? So the halacha is, you're stuck. I mean, there is no Megillah. Meaning, you could read without a bracha, but you could, theoretically speaking, travel your way out of a Chiyuv Megillah because you intended on being in Yerushalayim, so therefore you didn't have to read on the 14th when you're in Yerushalayim. Once the 15th arrived, you were out of Yerushalayim. You were back in Bnei Brak where there's no Chiyuv to read anymore. So you could travel your way out of it. The Yerushalmi says that in both directions. In the Yerushalmi paskins, the opposite. He says not only can you travel your way out, you could travel your way into two chiyuvim. You're a Ben Yerushalayim who finds himself in. I mean, it goes both ways. You could be a Ben Yerushalayim, meaning you should read on the 15th, who is in Bnei Brak the 14th. With your intent to wake up in the morning. You wake up in the morning, so that night and that day you got to do Megillah. Let's say after your Suda, you travel to Yerushalayim. Well, now you're planning on waking up tomorrow morning, Yerushalayim, you're a Ben Yerushalayim, you got to read it again. So the Bavli seems to hold that once you read once, you're Yotzei for that year. You don't have to read twice. The Yerushalmi holds that you have to chiyuvim. The way it comes in Halach Lamaisa is the Shulchan Aruch paskins, if a person has a suffix, which is what this would be, a person should read twice, make the bracha on the 14th if he can. It's a very, very... It's gishmak. It's not complicated. Once you work out it actually gets very fun to start thinking about, well, what happens if I go here, I go there, if I plan on leaving. And the point in time where your das matters is the nighttime. It's when the 14th is coming in. So that's what Rav is saying. So Rav is explaining the Mishnah that way. Now Rav extends it and says, first he asks, how do I know? How do I know that this is true? Meaning what? That you can have a temporary citizenship of a city even though you're not from there. It doubles the lashon of praz, which is the reference of a city. Michti. What do I have to double it up? The chiddush is that you see you can even be a member of a city for just one day and you'll have the din of that city. Ashkechen paras, that explains if you're from Bnei Brak, but how do I know if you're from Yerushalayim that it's true? Or the other way around. That explains if you're in Bnei Brak. How do I know that if you're in Yerushalayim, the din is the same? Mukaf minolan. Svarahu. To me, the paras ben yoma, kari paras, mukaf ben yoma, kari mukaf. I mean, why would I assume that temporary status is only going to be when you're in the 14th, so in Bnei Brak and not in Yerushalayim? So the Gemara says, therefore, that's the makor for Rav's din. The Amar Rav, he extends it. Ben Kafar, remember, these are the people who can lay on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. With the rabbis gave them a special dispensation that since they can't make it on the 14th, because we don't want to burden them to come into the big city twice. So we say, you know what, if you're anyways coming in for the previous Monday and Thursday, once you're there on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, you can already start learning Megillah then, right? So Ben Kfar Shahalach Li'ir. So let's say he did it already. He laid on the 12th, the night and day. It was Yotzei's mitzvah Megillah. But now on the 14th, he didn't intend on being there, but he ended up coming in a second time, right? So what's the halacha? So Ben Kaf Kare Himahin, he reads alongside the people in Bnei Brak, let's say. Why? My timer. Because really the Ikar Adin of the 11, 12, and 13 people is that they should really be reading on the 14th. It's just that what? Which is the Havamin of the Gemara there, that the reason is because they have to provide food, and the Maskana we said over there, it's because they provided food all year round. There was a schar. But the point is that you see that their only heter to do on 11, 12, and 13 is because of this unique reason. But honey milikis beduchte, that's only if they're still in their small little village on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and 14th. Aval ki isa be'ir, if they'd be in this big city on the 14th, kibnei ir boile mikri, meaning even though only at night. I mean, let's say they're right? What we're saying is, let's say they're in the big city at night, even if they're planning on going back, they would still read it that night, even though they would leave. And certainly if they're sticking around the rest of the day, then they would also read. So now asks Abaye on the second part of Rava's din, the second halacha that these villagers would have to read again, asks Abaye like this. Brisa says, Ben Krach, which we'll read right now to mean a walled city person. So a Ben Yerushalayim, Shahalach Le'ir that went to Bnei Brak, Ben Kach u Ben Kach, Kore Kim Komo. He reads like the place that he's from, which is not like Rava's din. Ask the Gemara, Ben Krach Sakadaitach, is there really such a havamina that a person who's from Yerushalayim, no matter what, reads like Yerushalayim, even if he's planning on staying in Bnei Brak for the entire Purim? That can't be. Doesn't it depend on whether he plans on coming back? It's a Mefurish Mishnah. We just saw it above. So Gemara says, "Allah ben Kfar." So we'll have to make a change in the girsa of the Mishnah to say that when it says ben Krach, it doesn't mean a walled city. It really means a village. And what we're saying is that when a villager goes, he doesn't have to follow the 14th. He doesn't lane on the 14th. He just lanes with whatever he was. So he says, "V'lav trutzim etarsa." You're asking me a kasha from a change in the girsa. Once you change the girsa, change it more. Tani Kairima and say that the din of this brisa means that you're right. A villager reads with. I mean, once you're changing it, change it. Meaning, you asked me a kasha from a brisa that the words of the brisa is not a kasha. You change the brisa and I make a kasha. So I'll change it further. Okay. Continues the Gemara. It said in the Mishnah that a person has to be yotze the mitzvah. What's the minimum amount? We saw three opinions. Tanya, we have a brisa for a fourth opinion. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai Omer mi balayil hahu from the Nadu Dashnas Hamelech. That's the fourth opinion. So again, we have the whole Mishnah according to Rav Meir. We have Mordechai, and then we have Haman, and now we're having Rav Shimon Bar Yochai say from the time that Achashverosh wakes up. We're going to see two opinions as to how these four opinions come about. Two different psukim. So Rabbi Yochanan says that they all darshan from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'tikas of Esther Amalko Mordechai Yehudi es kolat toikef." Toikef means the power, meaning the strength. So which strength, which tokef is it referring to that they wrote? Manda Amar Kula Takva Shel Achashverosh, and therefore you start from Yehi B'mei Achashverosh. Umanda Amar Mi Ish Yehudi starts from Mordechai. It's Takva Shel Mordechai. Umanda Amar Me'achar Dvarim Ha'ela Takva Shel Haman. Umanda Amar Mibalai Lahu Takva Shel Nes. Right, very nice and simple. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Huna Amar Mehach. He says a different malach. He says a little bit more complicated, but not that difficult. So what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says at the end of Esther, it says Uma Ra'u Al Kacha Uma Higia Eileim. Meaning, and the way to read that is, what did they see that they did this thing? It was because of this. And because of that, what was the consequence? It was this. So each one has a different way of filling the pshat in that pasuk. Manda Amar Kulu, the one who says that you have to read from the beginning, understands that Ma'ra, what does that mean? It means Ma'ra Achashverosh, Shenishtamesh B'Kelim Shel Beis HaMikdash. What was it that Achashverosh saw that he understood that it would be appropriate for him to go ahead and use the Kelim of the Beis HaMikdash? What did he see? Al-Kacha, on the following. Mishum Sh'dechashav Shiv Mishon Shnein V'lo Yifrik, like the complicated Gemara we had before, figuring out exactly how many years Yirmiyahu Hanavi's nevuah of when the second Beis HaMikdash was coming, that mistake that he made earlier, because he made the cheshbon of 70, that it should come out in his second year of his reign, he thought the third year should have the Suda, and therefore he took out the Kalim. Umahi Gi Aleim, and what happened to him because he made that mistake? The Katal Vashti, we saw in the Gemara that Vashti was killed because of that. That's the Shita of Rav Meir. Umanda Amar Mi Ish Yehudi, and the one who says that it goes from the introduction of Mordechai, it's that Ma Ra Mordechai the Ikanan B'Haman. What was it that Mordechai saw that made him detest Haman and bother him and not bow down to him? Al Kacha the Shavyanav She'Avodah Zarah, because he made himself an Avodah Zarah. And Umahi Gia Eleim, and what was the response to that? This Rachesh Nisa, that the byproduct of that was that there was an ace made and we were safe. That when it's the introduction of Haman, why was he so angry at all the Jews that he wanted to kill them? Like we saw earlier, that it was because Mordechai didn't bow to him, and then he said, who is Mordechai? He's a Jew. You know what? Let's kill all the Jews. And what ended up happening? What was the consequence of him having those thoughts? That he was eventually hung with his sons. Amanda Amar, in the fourth opinion, Shimon Bar Yochai, who said Mibalaylahu from the Nadu Dashnas Hamelech, Ma Ra Achashverosh Lahavi Sefer HaZichron, is what was it that made Achashverosh decide that he wanted to go call his book of Chronicles to see what happened? Al Kacha, the Zimte Esther Lahaman V'Hadeh, like we saw earlier, it was the fact that he was concerned, like, why is Esther inviting Haman? Must be that they're plotting. Maybe someone's not telling me. Why aren't they telling me? Because people don't listen to me. You know what? Maybe I got to find people that I did things for that maybe I never responded to what they did. So he asked for the Sefer HaZichron. And what was the consequence of him calling to his Shimshi to tell me what was written over there? he said this Rachash Nisa. Eventually, it came to the nace, like we learned in the first parak. The halacha is that lechatchila one has to read it from the very beginning, and maybe even b'diavad that's the case. And even according to the shittas who hold that you can start a little later, but that it's a smaller amount, that's the tokef. The Megillah itself can't be missing any words, and we saw earlier ksuva kula does not mean that every single word. It could have it that it's missing, potentially even as long as the majority of the words are there, as long as we're going to make a distinction between what's written, that you can have missing words. What you can't have is that the kriya is missing words. The kriya has to have every word from beginning to end. It's two different things. Meaning, if a person sneezes in the middle of the Megillah and he did not hear words, which is, you have to think about it. You have to be very careful. If you missed words, you have to read the whole Megillah again.
Really?
Yeah, because there's a separate halacha of you can't be kair l'mafreya. So you can't just go back and read that one word in the middle. You have to read the whole thing keseder, and therefore that's why it's really important.
That's annoying.
Well, it's annoying, but it's one of the main reasons why you should have a little rachmanas on the very frum people who are saying shh, 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 because really what they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to accomplish actually being yotz the mitzvah. It's not just simply that they don't like people screaming Hama. It's because they want to make sure that they're hearing every word, which is also why a Bal Koreh, when he's reading the Megillah, will typically not just start from the next word after Haman. They'll go back a word or two, continue reading Haman again, so that way they don't. Anyway, Megillah Nikras Sefer, Nikras Igeres. Very sadistic concept. It's just sort of tucked away over here in the middle of the Masechta. That Megillah is, on the one hand, this is what the Rajba mentioned earlier, that it's called a Sefer, meaning that it has dinim of like Chav Dalet Sifrei Tanakh, Sefer Kodesh, but it also has a din almost like of Torah Shabbal Peh, that it has an Igeres. Now, what is it that it has a status of like a Sefer, Nikras Sefer, meaning it's similar to a Sefer Torah, Shem Tofra Bechute Pishton Psula. The halacha is that when you make a Sefer Torah, you sew together the different sheets of parchment. They need to be sewn together with gidim, sinews. They actually have to come from an animal. They can't be made from really just an unnatural fiber, or even if it's a natural fiber, but not from an animal. Pishton, which is like flax, that would be puzzle. So the halacha is true as well for a Megillah, that it needs to be put together with animal gidin, meaning non-linen threads, right? The nikres igeres, however, it has kulas that it doesn't have the same din of a Sefer Torah. She'im hitel ba shlosha chute gidin kshera. Normally, a Sefer Torah needs to be tied up pretty much the whole way, whereas a Megillah you can have it just have three of them, and there can be space in between. Amar Rav Nachman, this last halacha ubilvad sheyehei mishulashin, it has to be that they're mishulish. They have to be neat. So Rashi says it basically just means there needs to be the same gap, right? So if you're putting three connections, then that means there's four spaces in between. There's the top space, the two middle ones, and then the final one, and that's when you have three. So Rashi explains those gaps have to be the same distance so that it's equidistant. There's other shittas. The Rambam, I think, holds that it needs to be mishulish. It means that it's 3 gidim 3 times, right? So it's 3, 3, and 3. And then there's another shita that holds that it's something else. I forget. We pass in halach lamaisa, you need all of them for a Megillah. But again, it means you could still have gaps. It continues the Gemara, Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, HaKayrib Megillah, HaKsuva ben HaKsuvim lo yotz. If a person reads a Megillah that is not separate, it's part of just a longer Igeres, a longer Ksav, so he's got Eicha, it's got Shir Shirim, and it happens to have Megillah in there also. That's going to be a problem. Why? Rashi says because there's no Pirsume Nisa. It has to be something that if you're reading B'tzibur, that it's obvious that you're reading Megillah. If someone were to walk in and just not know what you're saying, and they just see you reading from a klaf and they think, hey, it could be it's Kahelas, it could be it's Shir Shirim. No, it has to be that it's unique, that it's separate. It's got to be its own book. That is only true if the part of the parchment that you're reading from that's Megillah is the same size as the rest of it, and you literally physically can't tell the difference. But let's say you look at the klaf, and the part that you're reading from is taller or shorter, and it looks different, that already is considered enough of a Pirsa Nisa that even though it's not a separate book, then it would be okay. Aval, Misaru, Miyas, report to Leslanba, it would be okay. It doesn't have to be a separate book. Levi Bar Shmuel have a Kakari Kamed Rav Yehuda, meaning a similar story related to this halacha. The Megillah, Haksuva ben Haksuvim, with exactly this type of thing. Amr le, Hare Amru Hakir ben Megillah Haksuva ben Haksuvim lo yatsa. You can't do that. You need Persumini. So Amr Bchia Bar Abba Amr Yochan Hakir ben Megillah Haksuva ben Haksuvim lo yatsa. Umachalo amoicha. sorry, I read that wrong. They asked him, Haray Amru Hakar Megilla Ksuv ben Aksuvim Lo Yatz. Meaning they were saying that you can't do that. Fine. Amr Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Amr Rabbi Yochanan Hakar Megilla Ksuv ben Aksuvim Lo Yatz. If you read a Megillah in such a fashion when it's connected to other Svarim, it doesn't work. You can't do it. However, Umachu Lo Amoichan. But then he slapped himself on his forehead, so to speak, as if to say, maybe I'm not 100% about that. Meaning that's true. However, B'tzibur Shanu. Maybe the din is only true by a tzibur. Meaning by a yachid, if you're reading on your own, where there's no requirement for Pesumei Nisa, because you're just doing it to be yotzi your own little chiyuv, then any Megillah is fine, even if it's connected to other ones, and it doesn't even need to have a distinct shape or distinct size. But if you're doing it for the tzibur, where Pesumei Nisa is a chelik of what you're doing, then the halacha would come out that it would be ma'akev, which comes at a very interesting chiddush. And really, it's a kasha. What do you tell me? You tell me that if I'm b'tzibur, I can't be yotzi my mikra Megillah b'tzibur. Fine, okay, but why can't all of us just be yechidim hearing the Megillah? Like, it comes out a little bit lumdus, a little bit difficult, but it would come out a very interesting thing. It would come out that if, let's say, you're in a minyan and you hear Megillah, and it turns out if you only had 9 people, you're yotze, but if once the 10th person comes in, you're not yotze. This would be the scenario. If you only have 9 people, you can use any Megillah. But once a 10th person comes in, now you need to have the special Megillah that has Pesumei Nisa, that's either bigger or smaller. You wouldn't be yotze if it was all from the same thing. Either way, Shiur Hatfar. Now this is really just talking about Sefer Torah, right? So a Sefer Torah needs to be tied together, like we mentioned before, with these sinews. So it needs to be from the top to the bottom. You need to leave a slight amount on the top and a slight amount on the bottom unsewed. They can't be sewed right up onto the edge. Halach Moshe Misina. So he initially said this was a halach Moshe Misina, and that's therefore something we need to do, that it's a minat Torah tika halacha. However, he slapped himself on the forehead and said, no, actually I'm wrong. It's not halach Moshe Misina. He says it's only a din derabanan. And really the reason why we say that is it's in order for there to be almost like a warning sign as you're rolling the Sefer Torah up tightly. If it were to be tied all the way up to the top and to the bottom, it might rip because you won't realize that you're tightening it too much. Whereas if we leave a little bit on the edges, you'll see that when you're tightening it too much, it starts to spread. You'll know, hey, maybe calm down a little bit. Don't tighten it so much. There's a little bit of God over here, all from the Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, that if had there been even a sliver of space in the cave that Moshe and Eliyahu Hanavi were standing in when HaKadosh Baruch Hu passed in front of him, Kiviyachol, had there been even a sliver of light, Kimole nekev machatzidkis, even the size of a small, tiny little sewing needle, even Moshe and Eliyahu Hanavi would not have been able to withstand the power of that light. Why? Shenemar, because like the pasuk says, Ki lo yir'eni ha'adam v'chai, a person cannot see HaKadosh Baruch Hu and live. So even Moshe and Eliyahu Hanavi wouldn't have been able to handle it. The Amr Rabbi Chia bar Ava and Rabbi Yochanan, Mai dechsiv ve'aleim kechol advarim asher diber Hashem. So yeah, I wasn't 100% sure where the cave is. Eliyahu Hanavi did, but I'm saying I don't, and even then I think there's different farshim over here that say it doesn't mean a cave. It might mean that there was a wall of some type. I'm not exactly sure.
My back, you will see that one.
That's the right. Fanisa me'achorai ufanai lo. What is it? Raisa sachoru ufanai lo yero. Either way. So Rabbi Chia bar Ava Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mai dechsiv. What does it mean when the pasuk says ve'aleim kechol advarim? Hold on. Turns out.
Which parsha? Where is it? In Shmos 22. 33.
I wish. I'll tell you. This is my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that whoever it was who decided to take the psukim and put everything up in the corner did a tremendous disservice to people learning.
What do you mean?
It used to be, when I was growing up, the Tzuras Hadaf, if there was a pasuk quoted, you would see where it was right on the side of the Gemara. So if, let's say, something's in Mishlei, Yud Beis, it would say Mishlei Yud Beis on the side. I think, especially for people who aren't learning Tanakh, I don't know about you, if I'm learning a Gemara, if I can make sense of the pasuk without having to look it up, I just continue going, right? Like I don't look up there, and then you lose out on where psukim are from. I mean, it's the little Tanakh that we do learn. I think it's a disservice. Either way. He showed Hashem taught Moshe dikduke Torah, the esim and all the different types of drushes that one could learn in the Torah from the words that seemingly don't have any meaning. The dikduke seifrim, the halachas of safros, the umasha seifrim asidin l'chadesh, and what the sofrim were going to eventually add on. Umayni umikra Megillah, that there was a special thing on Har Sinai that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu about the story that's going to one day happen, that the sofrim are asidin l'chadesh, and that's Mikra Megillah. I think the Brisker Rebbe brings the raya from here also, that you see that there's a unique chiddush of Mikra Megillah dafka by the sofrim, the safras, because there's a special unique halacha by Megillah of this specific type of. Either way, Mishnah continues, Hakol kisherin likros esam Megillah. Everyone is kosher to read the Megillah, chutz micheresh shota v'katan, except for a person who is a cheresh, a deaf person, a shota who is a simple. A shota is a person who doesn't have das. And what's a good English word for a shota? What does it say over there?
Deranged person.
Okay, yeah, I like my words better, but okay, a shota is basically a person who has the das. A retarded person is the politically correct way of saying. Shkaita, yeah. With common sense. The katan and a katan. I forgot that he's there. Kalma, I can't believe I forgot that you're there. The katan. So we have to understand the mission over here.
Really good.
Well, so if that's the first thing, it's mashmovim over here. A woman could read it. So the shaila is reading it. Maybe it only means reading it for other women. Can she be yotze a man? Meaning, generally speaking, the rule is that one cannot be motzi someone else. One cannot, take care of someone else's chiyuv if their chiyuv is on a lower level. So you and I, all of us here, we have a chiyuv as men min haTorah to, let's say, for instance, blow shofar, right? So can I be, or what's a good another classic example would be kiddush. Let's say I could be motzi you in kiddush. Maybe I could be motzi you. But what about if someone's only chayiv in something midrabanan? And the reason why a woman can't be motzi a man isn't because we don't treat women equal to men. It's because women are not mechuyev in something, and if they're not mechuyev, then they don't have the same level of chiyuv. They can't be motzi you. And the same thing would be true of even a katan. What if you have a katan who is a bar chinuch? I'm not talking about a 6-year-old who has no clue what's going on. I'm talking about you have a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, someone who for sure has reached the age of chinuch, where they understand what's going on. They know what Megillah is. They understand that we're reading it. Can a katan come and read for me? So that's the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah says? It's a kol ksherin likros Megillah chutz micheres shota v'katan, except a cheretz shota v'katan. And here we're going to assume that, and then Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan. If Rabbi Yehuda is being machshir b'katan, he clearly doesn't mean a 6-year-old. He means one who came to chinuch, which means the Tanna Kama is saying that a katan she'egiya lechinuch can't be motzi me. And the understanding will be, because if you hold that, what is a katan? A katan who is hegiya lechinuch, why does he have a mitzvah? Because it's a din chinuch. And what's the din chinuch? To read Megillah. So he has 2 dirabanans telling him to do it, which means in order for him to be called a mechuyev b'davar, he requires 2 dirabanans, whereas an adult only has 1 dirabanan of mikra Megillah. So the Tanna Kama is going to say the katan shehigiya lechinuch, who is only mechuyev because of these 2 din dirabanans, can't be motzi me, who only has 1 dirabanan. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says no, benkach ubenkach, it's all dirabanans. If the katan is mechuyev b'dirabanan, then I'm mechuyev b'dirabanan. He could be motzi me, and he could read Megillah for me. And by the way, the halacha by a cheresh over here, we'll read it inside. The halacha by cheresh here does not mean a person who's patur for mitzvahs. A cheresh, we mean here, it means a cheresh that can't hear but can speak, because we're specifically talking about someone who's going to read the Megillah. If he can't speak, then the whole discussion doesn't make any sense. We're only talking about here a cheresh who can speak,
Exactly.
which means he's mechuyev in mitzvahs. And so then the question is, well, why would I have a hav meaning? He can't be motzi me. I mean, why can't the person who can speak, who's mechuyev in mitzvahs, be motzi me? So there we're going to say, well, what if he's not being yotzei his own mitzvah? And the Torah says he might not be being yotzei his own mitzvah, because since he can't hear his own words, and we said earlier that the halacha is, it seems that a person who can't, just like when you're saying Kriya Shema, you have to be able to hear the words you're speaking. You have to, Hishmiel la'azno, it could be a cheresh is not yotzei the mitzvah on his own. Right? So the question then is how is a cheresh ever yotzi the mitzvah of Megillah? Pashtas he's not, because he can't hear someone else read it and he can't read it to himself. So you have to figure that out. But either way, Zok Gemara, Man tana cheresh di eved namila. Who is the shita who holds that a cheresh, even with the eved, can't be yotze the mitzvah, can't read for me, right? Meaning one could have understood that maybe lechatchila I can't hear from a cheresh. Why? Because he himself can't hear. But in the end of the day, he's a bar chiyuva, so why can't his reading work for me? The Gemara assumes when it says in the Mishnah that a cheresh of the katan it doesn't work, it's even with the eved it's not. So ask the Gemara, who is that shita? Amrav Masna Rabbi Yossi. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. What's Rabbi Yossi's opinion? The Tanan. It says in the Mishnah, Hakoyreyas Shema. If a person sells Kriya Shema, but he doesn't hear the words, Yotza, he's Yotze. That's the sheet of the Tanakama. We'll see in a moment that that's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer lo Yotza. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you're not Yotze. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi holds, if you haven't heard it, it's like you didn't hear it. And therefore, the implication of the Gemara is that it's b'di evet even, you're not going to be, right? Lo Yotza. Umimai de Rabbi Yossi, as the Gemara, maybe we'll say that the read in the Mishnah is that, not that it's talking about that b'di evet, you're not Yotze in our Mishnah. Maybe it's just saying, lechatchila, don't do it. Mimai de Rabbi Yossi, b'di evet nami loi. You don't have to read the Mishnah that way. Dilma Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe it's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda who says technically you are Yotzei Kriya Shema if you can't hear. It's just lechatchila. You should probably try to open up. You should try to speak it up louder. And therefore, maybe Rabbi Yehuda would hold it by Megilla. The halacha is that einachanami b'di evet you'd be Yotzei. It's just that our Mishnah is only teaching us a din lechatchila. Ulechatchila hu delay how the evet shaper dami. So the Gemara says lo yisakal. Don't say that. Why? The Tani. Cheresh dumi the shota v'katan. Since it says in the Mishnah cheresh, we'll assume that cheresh of our Mishnah is similar to a shota v'katan. Ma shota v'katan the eved nami lo. We know that a shota and a katan with the eved you're not yotzei. So too the cheresh must be the cheresh that is not even yotzei with the eved. And now we'd be saying that even the katan isn't yotzei with the eved. So does the katan here mean the katan sheyagil lechinuch? So that's a good question. Av cheresh the eved nami lo. Maybe you'll say, no, what's the problem? Say that when it says cheresh, it means lechatchila, but b'di'evet good. And katan and cheresh, katan and shota, even b'di'evet not. The Gemara doesn't have a good teretz for that. So the Gemara says, I'll give you a different reason. Mediktani seifa, and by the way, we're going to hold here because the next Gemara really gets complicated and it goes a little too far. But we'll hold here, not this minute over here, but just this last line here. Mediktani seifa, Rabbi Yehuda, Machshir bekatan michlal dereisha lav Rabbi Yehuda. Meaning to tell me that the Mishnah is not that it could also be Rabbi Yehuda when the Mishnah itself says that Rabbi Yehuda is cholok in the Seifa. It's likely that the reisha is not Rabbi Yehuda and therefore must be Rabbi Yossi. Right. We're going to continue over here discussing katan shingil. It just gets a little complicated, and I want to stop in the middle.
Okay, great.
You said you wanted to finish by 8:30.
Yeah.